How big was the Royals win yesterday? We'll tell you next on this edition of Locked on Royals.
You are Locked on Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked on Royals on the Locked on Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can find us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you are a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and the show, well, I'm based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB. I do some hosting, some co-hosting, and some producing as well. So as it seems, pretty busy in the sports world. But when you come to this podcast, when you click on this link, you are getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by SupplyHouse. We'll have more on them coming up in about 10 to 15 minutes or so. But if you need to have your electrical supplies covered and found, that's where you need to go to. That's where you need to place those orders, supplyhouse.com. But again, more on them coming up in about 10 to 15 minutes or so. Again, questions and comments can always be left to me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15, or you can send them to our YouTube channel. I'll try my best to answer all of those, assuming I can get to them in a timely manner. I don't want to leave anybody hanging for too long. Well, the Royals certainly left everybody hanging yesterday until the bottom of the ninth inning, when Nelson Velasquez had a pinch hit two-run triple to tie the game, and then Nick Lofton had a sacrifice fly to right field to walk off the Padres and avoid a sweep for the first time this season. So they enter their off day feeling pretty good about at least salvaging one game in that series against San Diego. And again, it's one game, it's one win in a bad stretch of play. The Royals only took one in Minnesota. They felt like they should have taken two, and they should have taken arguably 2 of 3 against San Diego, but they also had a lead in all 3 games of those series. I think they had a much better chance, of course, to win on Friday, even though they trailed 11-3 in the ninth, because they had a 1-run lead going into the 8th inning. So you kind of felt a little bit underwhelmed about how that Padres series was going. But I'll tell you this, even when you can just take one game in a series, you automatically feel better about moving into your next one. Because if the Royals would have laid down yesterday and been swept and lost 3-1, I don't think you have any momentum whatsoever going into Cleveland. Even though Cleveland lost yesterday, Minnesota won. So Minnesota would have been, I believe, a game back of Kansas City for the second wild card spot. Now, the Royals still would have had a 4.5 game lead for a playoff spot, but now they've jumped it back up to 5.5 because Detroit and Boston did exactly what you needed them to do. Nobody swept anybody, and nobody seriously gained any ground. In fact, nobody gained ground on the Royals because of the way that series went at Fenway Park. So the Royals get a much-needed off day, it feels like, just a chance to reset for a couple of the guys, and maybe one specifically, though we're going to talk about him in the third segment today. But, you know, it just felt like yesterday was a pivotal point, a really pivotal point because of how this stretch is going, how it's gone, and how it's going to be for the next 2 weeks or so. The Royals will have 2 full weeks of brutal, brutal play. And I don't mean that of their actual play on the field. I mean of their opponent. They're going to have Cleveland, of course, upcoming. We'll talk about them in the second segment. Then they're going to get the Mariners at home. The Mariners are in first place in the AL West. Cleveland's first place in the Central. Then they're going to get the Yankees next week. That'll be another tough series because that's the best team in the American League right now. First place in the American League East. And then next weekend, you're going to have the Dodgers in LA, first place in the National League West. So 4 straight opponents where they are first place foes. First place foes that are on the docket. This is your toughest stretch of the season. If you can get out of this, still playing 5 games over 500, I think you feel pretty good. But I'm not sure if you lose yesterday, that's what you're kind of eyeballing, because then you would have only taken 1 of your previous 8 games two of those teams were very good in Minnesota and San Diego. And then you're going into play, I would say, your toughest opponent to date in the Cleveland Guardians. And even though the Guardians lost to the Nationals, we know how the Royals have fared in Cleveland over the last number of years. They don't win many series there. But now you go after Sunday, you have your off day, and now you have Seth Lugo on the bump for game one. Hard not to be a little bit excited about your advantage in game one. Now, game two, Brady Singer's coming off a missed start. Who knows how he's going to look? And then Thursday, the Royals can make a decision on who they want to go with. Maybe they skip Daniel Lynch and they just go straight to Alec Marsh because Michael Wacha, of course, is on the injured list. But they'll have a decision to make on Thursday. But game one, all of a sudden, becomes kind of your must win. And I hate using that phrase. I hated using it yesterday. But for a series against Cleveland, I don't think you want to drop game one with Seth Lugo and then rely on Brady Singer and Daniel Lynch to grab you a game against the Guardians. Because this series is pretty pivotal. If you don't fare well in this one, if you do get swept in Cleveland, all of a sudden you look up and you're 7.5 games back at first place and you've likely fallen to third, even though the Yankees are in the Bronx this early part of the week. So maybe Cleveland just builds a huge lead in the Central and you plummet back to, just far back in second place. But if you find a way to win this series, well, then you look up and I believe that would make you 3.5 games back. I think you'd gain one game on Cleveland, but you feel good about taking any series on the road, especially against a team like this. But going back to yesterday, I think it shows the fight that this team has had, and it's good to have a W to go along with that. It's not just, well, this team has fight. They sent the tying run to the plate. They sent the go-ahead run to the plate, but didn't win. Yesterday was different. Yesterday was much different for this ball club. And how important was it? How big was it that on Friday night, the Royals entered that bottom of the ninth down 11-3? And almost, I was there. It was chaotic in the way the Royals almost found a way to tie that game, came feet away off the bat again by Nelson Velasquez of tying that game. But if the Royals, like I just said for Sunday, just laid down and said it's 11-3, and the Padres didn't have to go to their closer, the Royals lose yesterday. The Royals get swept in this series against the Padres. But the fact they made the Padres use Robert Suarez in game one and game two, and Estrada for that matter as well. They had to use Estrada in game one and game two. Two of their best relievers. It allowed the door to open up on Sunday. And that, to me, is the fight we're talking about, that it's not always just one game. It's not always just, well, they fought hard, because in the Minnesota series, it didn't matter that they forced the Twins to use Duran in game one and game two and game four. I mean, he was fine to use. So it didn't really impact that series as much as we all thought it would, but that's not necessarily a thing you just say, well, it never matters. You don't just say, well, getting your closer into the game, but you still lose. It's not something you hang your hat on. Well, in series like this, you do, because if the Royals didn't force Suarez into the game on Friday night, they don't win on Sunday and they're swept. And now they're sitting here on an off day. They don't have a chance to really bounce back at all. And they go into Cleveland on a 4-game losing streak. They'd been swept for the first time this year. It wouldn't have been a good feel. But yesterday was important. Yesterday was important, I think, for the fan base more so than anything. I don't believe the players have lost any confidence. And sometimes we think that the players feel the same way the fans do. But I really feel like this year the fan base has overreacted more times than not to any losing streak, to any bullpen implosion, to any players struggling. I feel like at times we are prone to overreact because the Royals haven't been in a spot like this in, let's say, 7 years. Yeah, 2017. They were a couple games over 500 at the beginning of June in 2021. But again, that all was fool's gold because that team wasn't really good to begin with. They had their 16-9 start, but the run differential was horrific. Their rotation wasn't very good, and their offense had gotten lucky against some really bad opponents. But to me, this team is different. Run differential-wise, rotation-wise, star power-wise. 2021 team didn't have Bobby Witt Jr. 2021 team didn't have Cole Reagans, didn't have Michael Garcia, didn't have Vinny Pasquantino. It's a much different team. They've got more star players. Now, the bullpen, this one I would argue is worse than the 2021 version because the 2021 version still had a good Josh Staumont. They had Scott Barlow, a back end of the bullpen that had kind of solidified itself a little bit. But this bullpen's in a bit of a cold stretch right now. We'll see if they can bounce back in Cleveland. Going to be tough to do so because that's a really good team. And also Cleveland never has to worry about their bullpen. So can't trail late in this series because Cleveland has the best bullpen ERA in all of Major League Baseball. But you feel a little bit better walking into this series after what you were able to accomplish on Sunday with a come-from-behind 4-3 win over the San Diego Padres. We'll take our first break of the show. When we come back, let's preview this upcoming series against the Guardians and how big it is just in early June. We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our title sponsor today in SupplyHouse. Now, with SupplyHouse, get supplies from the site that's made for skilled trades, SupplyHouse.com. SupplyHouse.com is the reliable way to order plumbing, h-vac, and electrical products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Shop a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands and get your order delivered right to your door with fast shipping from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business and talk to a person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining SupplyHouse.com's free Trade Master program. Every Trade Master gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at SupplyHouse.com and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at SupplyHouse.com. So don't waste any more time and head over to SupplyHouse.com. Well, as you can already tell, as you've gone through the first 10 to 12 minutes of this podcast episode, still don't have our usual camera, still don't have our usual audio. One more day, I promise it's going to be fixed by tomorrow. Had a little bit of a delay with the laptop repair, and you know me, always dealing with some kind of electrical or technical problem when it comes to this podcast. Hoping that it's not going to set back anything. I'd imagine tomorrow, still going to find a way to get a podcast episode up late, probably after the game is my best bet on when that episode will go up. But wanted to make sure today that I was going to get it up in the morning time. That way I can have plenty more time to figure out what's going on with the laptop, make sure that I can get it back in time and get everything all set up. Because that's the unfortunate part with this repair is that I have to go back and set everything back up, get new logins for everything, got to get all the data back. It can be frustrating if you've dealt with it before. But glad we can still get some form of an episode up today, even if the audio quality is a little bit echoey. I know it sounded that way, and the camera quality isn't as crystal clear as it usually is if you are watching on YouTube. But hopefully you can still enjoy this episode this morning. Well, we've been waiting for this series for quite some time between the Kansas City Royals and the Cleveland Guardians. First place versus second place in the American League Central. Everybody knows the importance of faring well against the team that's leading in your division. I think if you are to make that playoff jump, to do the impossible for the Royals this year, you can't go and get your doors blown off by Cleveland every single time you play them. And I think that with the scheduling of Major League Baseball, it's not as dire as it used to be because you used to see a divisional opponent 18 times in a season or 18 or 19 times in a season. It was ridiculous how many times you played the White Sox and the Guardians and the Tigers and the Twins. Now you just see them 9 times, I believe it is. Now the Royals are going to get 3 more series or 2 more series after this against Cleveland. So it's going to be difficult. It's going to be a tall task for this team because even in the good years, when the Royals were winning the American League, were winning the Central, they did not play well against Cleveland. I can't remember a time the Royals actually played well against Cleveland. Went into Cleveland, took a series, I mean, they've had their dramatic win there from time to time, but this is an opponent the Royals just do not match up well against. And this year, maybe more so than ever, is not a good matchup. But the game isn't won. The series isn't won on paper, right? You actually have to go out there and compete, find certain ways to break your way. I truly believe in this series, it's not going to come down to the Royals offense. It's not going to come down to containing Jose Ramirez or David Fry, who's had this unbelievable surge. Those things are obvious. Those things are important. Like if the Royals can't hit, they're not going to win a game in this series. To me, it's going to come down to this Royals bullpen and this Royals bullpen alone. We know Cleveland isn't going to allow many runs in the 7th, 8th, and 9th inning, if any, to be honest with you. I kind of feel like in this series, if you trail by more than 1 run in the final 3 innings, you're not going to win that game against Cleveland. You're going to need to hope that you're carrying a 1 or 2 or 3 run lead, or maybe best case scenario, kind of in the way when Lugo pitched in Minnesota, you're up like 6-1 or 7-1, and it doesn't really matter, right? That would be the dream scenario for game 1. Not even having to worry about it. The Royals tagged Tristan McKenzie for a bunch of runs in the first 5 innings, and Seth Lugo does what Seth Lugo's done all year long, gives you 6 innings, a 1-run ball, and you move on to the bullpen. To me, it's all about this bullpen. The Royals bullpen has been awful in the last week. Absolutely awful. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to pinpoint guys that, had a really good outing and that could be on the upswing. I get it. Sam Long has been a great addition since coming up from Omaha, but he's still not a guy you're going to trust in a 1-run game in this series. Maybe Matt Contreras at that point because of how much they've struggled in the final 3 innings. But truthfully, where do you turn to? Where do you turn to in a 1-run game? Do you just have to stick with your gut and go Serpa, Schreiber, MacArthur? Well, all 3 of those guys haven't really been good over the last week. So to me, it's going to be about mixing and matching there, finding the best possible way to hang on to whatever lead you may have. And first things first, you got to get a lead. You got to make sure that you can actually hold on to a 2-run lead or a 1-run lead in the early part of the game. That's what I'm a little bit anxious for when Brady Singer returns to the bump and if Daniel Lynch throws on Thursday, which I anticipate he does. They could shake it up a little bit because Daniel Lynch last time started for Brady Singer in that spot. Maybe they go with Lynch on Wednesday and then they throw Brady Singer on Thursday, but I believe Singer's slated to start on Wednesday, so I'm not going to just assume that switch happens. But with those 2 guys, I mean, we saw Daniel Lynch cough up a 4-run lead. We've seen Brady Singer in his career cough up some big leads when the offense gave it to him. But Cleveland is just, they're a team that's thriving. They haven't played a really good opponent in quite some time, but they've played good opponents this year, and they were able to do okay enough. They're weird. They're nearly at 40 wins. I think they're 39-20. They lost to Washington, but won that series. They lost the series against Colorado. That can be dubbed as weird. They've lost 3 of 4 to Chicago in Chicago earlier this year. So, yeah, they've had their moments, but overall, they're still an incredibly dominant team. They have star power on this team. They've had a rotation that has really been able to pick up the slack for Shane Bieber. And that's an important factor of this Cleveland team. That could have been their downfall. That could have been we had a great start, but now we've lost our ace. How in the world are we going to make it through without our ace? Well, their bullpen has been the best in baseball, and they've had guys like David Fry really step up. Jose Ramirez turning into a career year. I mean, they've even had slumps from guys like Josh Naylor, right? They've had slumps from Andres Jimenez from time to time. I mean, they were playing Estevan Florial early on in the year. They just DFA'd him a couple days ago. So they've had their offensive woes. But still, Cleveland is a team that you can't look at their lineup and go, well, I don't know many of their guys. They must not be very good. No, they are incredibly good. There's a reason they're 19 games over 500. And they have a chance to really put the Royals in a tough spot in the American League Central if they find a way to sweep them or just take the series. Because if they take the series against the Royals, they have a 5.5 game lead. They gain a game probably over Minnesota and Kansas City because the Twins are going to New York and they never play well there at all. So should be a lot of fun. The Royals will get maybe their best pitcher on the bump in game 1 in Seth Lugo. He's going to go up against Tristan McKenzie, who's not Cleveland's number 1 pitcher, but the Royals have always had their struggles with him. So we'll see tomorrow night how that game goes down. Again, they have an off day today, get a chance to rest up and head off to Cleveland. Well, before we move on to our final segment, I want to give a shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every league. Locked On Sports Today brings you that can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, when we return, the Tigers sent down Spencer Torkelson, a former number 1 overall pick, because of his struggles this year. Are the Royals going to do the same with MJ Melendez? We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can always find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And you can also find us on wherever you download your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit the follow button and subscribe. And we'll be sure to make sure our audio and camera quality are back to normal tomorrow. I'll have a much longer period of time, even though you probably said, well, you had all of Sunday, you had all of the weekend to get it fixed. They weren't done with the repairs in time. So just getting it back this morning, going to make sure everything's all good to go for tomorrow night's episode, but wanted to get one out this morning so I didn't have to worry about figuring that out while trying to do a podcast episode a little bit later on today. Well, before our final segment, I want to let you know about PrizePicks. You've heard about them before on our show, but with PrizePicks, you can turn $10 into $1,000 in a single game watching your favorite sport this summer. Now, additionally with that, you can make a PrizePicks lineup in as little as 60 seconds. You just need to pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stats projections, and you're locked in. If you're looking for promotions, PrizePicks has got you covered every week, from lowering select player stats projections on Tuesdays, which each increases your chance of getting a win, to getting your entry fee back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. PrizePicks is America's number 1 fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of PrizePicks community today. And the finals mean more on PrizePicks, so do the star players. You get boosted payouts with select basketball stars so that you won't find anywhere else. Again, that's going to be Dallas and Boston. Have a lot of fun with that on PrizePicks. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. Again, that's LOCKEDONMLB, LOCKEDONLB, for a first deposit match of up to $100. Well, the Detroit Tigers made a move yesterday in demoting Spencer Torkelson, their former number 1 overall pick in the 2020 MLB draft, down to AAA because of his struggles. He has had a brutal 2024 after smacking 30 home runs last year. Kind of seemed like, Spencer Torkelson was going to be the meat of that order. He was going to be their cleanup hitter for the next half decade, and you were going to have to fear that middle of the lineup in Detroit. But it's just been awful for Spencer Torkelson. And the Tigers, 2 games under 500, made the decision it's not going to get much better up here. You're going to have to make the adjustments down in AAA. I believe they sent him down in Toledo, if I'm not mistaken. So the Tigers made that decision. The Tigers are not in a great playoff spot right now. Just like with Boston, they are significantly behind Kansas City and Minnesota for that final wild card spot. They trail by 5.5 games or 5 games, whatever it is. And though 5 games seems small, when you have 102 more games to go, you have to play really well for 5 games, and that other team has to play pretty poorly for 5 games to make some serious ground. But for Detroit, they feel like Spencer Torkelson is not the best option to get this team going, that putting him in the lineup every single day is not going to be beneficial. He needs a reset. I'd imagine we're going to see Spencer Torkelson back at some point, but this segment is not about Spencer Torkelson and the Detroit Tigers. This is about the Royals and what they can do with MJ Melendez. If you would go back to the beginning of the offseason, and again, I'm going to tear myself down a little bit here, I was very optimistic about the season MJ Melendez could put in. And I thought in the beginning parts of April, you were seeing a guy that was carrying that effectiveness that he had in the second half and at the beginning of 2024. And yeah, I fell for it. I fell for it hard because, as I'm sure a lot of you do with the player you want to see succeed, you take any small sample size and go, oh, that's going to translate well. And that was me jumping the gun. That was foolish of me because MJ Melendez didn't just fall off. He didn't just struggle. He catastrophically dropped off into one of the worst hitters in the American League. And I don't know what happened. I don't know what switched. I don't know how he's not able to go back to that second half form. Maybe it's because of the pressure. Maybe it's because it feels like the sky is falling in his world. Who knows? But we revisited this last week, I believe it was, with MJ Melendez and sending him down to Omaha. Now, I want to go out there and answer this question for the hundreds I've gotten on Drew Waters of why not call up Drew Waters? What's going on with Drew Waters? Well, Drew Waters didn't play well in May. His on-base percentage was under 300 in the month of May. So you can't really call him up when now he's struggling again. The Royals want to make sure that there is no place for him in Omaha. And for the fans saying, well, just demote MJ to Omaha, find somebody else out there to play the field. Yeah, that is more of a aggressive approach because the Royals right now could maybe just not play MJ Melendez every day. And I really don't believe there's a fix in Omaha for this lineup. I don't. And that's the stance I'm going to really take until maybe we do see somebody come from Omaha and prove me wrong. I've been proven wrong before in this show, and I will gladly be proven wrong. If it makes the team better, that's all I care about. But I just don't see the fix being in Omaha. And for the Royals, what we talked about last week, if they're going to demote MJ, I think it purely has to be a confidence thing. Because for a guy that's been in the big leagues for 3 years, and Torkelson's been in the big leagues for, I think, around the same time, I think 3 years as well, I think it's about confidence because what you can do in Omaha and what you can do in Toledo, if you're Spencer Torkelson, you can absolutely tear up that pitching and you go, okay, I figured out what I was doing wrong. I'm back in my groove. And even though it's much worse pitching and you'll see at the big league level, it's just beating up on somebody. Sometimes you just need to beat up on bad pitching to feel like you have your confidence back. But to me, it's not so much about tinkering with the swing. I've never really believed that when you talk about a reset. A reset is not sending a player down and going, fix his swing down there. I think it's about trying to fix something up at the big league level and then go, okay, we're going to try out that new swing down in Omaha. It's not sending them down to the minor leagues to get fixed. It's about confidence and working on things that are easier to work on against bad pitching they are against big league pitching. And maybe the Royals are at that point. Maybe by the time this podcast comes out, they would have already made a move, right? Drew Waters wasn't in the lineup in Omaha the last 2 days, so maybe it is Drew Waters' time in Kansas City. But I think this Torkelson thing shows that at least one team out there in the big leagues goes, listen, you're not going to hit 170, 180 in our lineup every single day. This is the big leagues. And Detroit is in a far worse playoff spot than the Royals are right now. The Royals are 11 games over 500. They don't really have the luxury of just letting it all play out with their outfield. The issue is, to me, I don't know if the fix is in Omaha. And the other problem is they believe MJ Melendez is going to be a big part of this lineup and a big part of this team. Now, when I say big, maybe it is just being a fourth outfielder, but having some form of value. They love his defense out there, but his offense has completely lagged behind. It's been a career worst year for him. But the risk you run of demoting a player and them not maybe taking it well or not playing well, then the confidence completely goes out the window. You send MJ Melendez down and he barely hits, well, you might have lost him now for the entire year. And for some fans out there, you think that's fine. You don't want to see MJ Melendez up in Kansas City again. I get that stance, but the Royals aren't going to have the resource, I think, to go get an elite outfielder at the deadline or here in the month of June. They're going to need to have some of these guys improve. And does that mean sending MJ down to Omaha, figuring out some things and coming back? Maybe it does, but also maybe it doesn't. Okay, that'll do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. You can always follow me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. We got one more shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available for free on the Fire TV Channels app. Tomorrow, we're going to have more of a recap on Game 1 in Cleveland and maybe how the AL Central standings are shaking out a little bit and how this outfield is looking in Omaha compared to what they're looking like in Kansas City. That's all coming up tomorrow, another edition of Locked On Royals. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.